Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a deep, pretty mind-bending dive into the past, but we're going to be looking at it through a very specific, carefully constructed window. We're exploring how Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels viewed the mighty Aztec Empire. So we aren't looking at this through the lens of modern archaeology today. Instead, we're using a strictly materialist framework with Raymundo Lizárraga Verdugo's incredibly comprehensive book, Philosophy of Civilization, Marx, Civilization, and the Demiurge acting as our guide. It is just a fascinating way to see exactly how 19th century economic theories can be applied to ancient history.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, 1. The Marxist anthropological lens. Then 2. The middle stage of barbarism. Moving into 3. The Asiatic mode of production. After that, 4. The politics of sacrifice. And finally, 5. Economics of social control. Now, as we unpack all of this, we're going to remain completely neutral. Our goal here is simply to understand how this specific theoretical framework interprets the brutal mechanics of an empire.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the Marxist anthropological lens, decoding history through economics.
So, our primary source material today is Raymundo Lizárraga Verdugo's work. What Lizárraga Verdugo has done so meticulously is compile exactly how Marx and Engels viewed non-European societies. He shows us that, for these two philosophers, human progress absolutely wasn't driven by big ideas or by gods. No, it was driven by the physical, on-the-ground economic realities of how people actually produced what they needed to survive.
This brings us to a crucial concept, historical materialism. You really have to get this framework to understand the rest. Think of it like a giant building. The foundation, the economic base, is how things are produced. You know, the tools, the labor, the raw resources. Everything else in that building, the superstructure, is the culture, the politics, the religion, the laws. In the Marxist framework, the foundation dictates the entire shape of the building. So, everything from Aztec religion to their brutal wars of conquest is ultimately driven by underlying economic forces and the production of wealth.
Moving right along to Section 2, the middle stage of barbarism. Morgan's evolutionary scale.
To really understand Marx and Engels here, we actually have to look at the anthropologist Lewis H. Morgan. Engels enthusiastically adopted Morgan's three-step evolutionary scale for human societies, which goes 1. Savagery, 2. Barbarism, and 3. Civilization. Now keep in mind, this wasn't about moral judgment at all. It was a highly rigid classification based purely on technological milestones. Savagery basically meant hunter-gatherers. Barbarism introduced agriculture and pottery, and civilization, that required phonetic writing and modern private property.
So, where did the Aztecs actually fit into all this? Well, according to Morgan's scale, they landed firmly in the middle stage of barbarism. And this categorization was based almost entirely on the tools they used. They had absolutely incredible agriculture and monumental architecture, for sure, but they lacked the specific technologies that European theorists linked to the next developmental stage, things like the wheel, iron smelting, and large beasts of burden. And this creates an absolutely fascinating paradox. Marx and Engels are observing a society with stunning organizational complexity. Tenochtitlan was larger and vastly cleaner than most European cities of the time, complete with running aqueducts and these massive stone pyramids. Yet, from a pure 19th century materialist perspective, it was technologically restricted. They had literally built a sprawling empire using Stone Age tools.
All right, let's get into Section 3, the Asiatic mode of production, the imperial economy.
This naturally begs a pretty massive question. How on earth did this incredibly complex society function economically if they didn't have private property the way Europe knew it? Well, Marx used a very specific term for this. He called it the Asiatic mode of production, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as Oriental despotism. This was basically his way of categorizing these massive, highly centralized states that existed completely outside of the European feudal or capitalist models. In this system, you don't really have individual landlords. Instead, you have communal villages that produce everything they need, but they are overseen by a massive, powerful central state that demands incredibly heavy tribute.
Let's break down the nuts and bolts of this Aztec economy. First, there was no modern private property. Land was held communally by local groups called calpules. These villages were agrarian. They were entirely self-sufficient, but looming over all of them was this highly centralized state power located in Tenochtitlan. The Aztec ruling class didn't sustain their immense empire through free trade. They did it through the rigid, continuous extraction of tribute. They were constantly demanding goods, food, and human labor from the neighboring tribes they conquered.
Engels actually hit the nail on the head regarding this dynamic when he wrote, "The cohesive force of civilized society is the state, which is essentially a machine destined to repress the oppressed class." Viewing it through the Marxist lens, the central Aztec state isn't seen as some benevolent protector of its people. Not at all. It's viewed purely as an engine of extraction and control, existing solely to pull wealth from the outer periphery directly into the center.
Which brings us to Section 4, the politics of sacrifice, the mechanics of terror.
Okay, we're going to tackle the most shocking aspect of Aztec culture now, and we're going to deconstruct it using this exact same materialist lens. Because when you strip away all the spiritual mythology, the idea of feeding the gods to keep the sun moving, a very, very different picture emerges. A materialist interpretation reveals human sacrifice as a highly calculated tool for political terror and social control. It wasn't just religious mysticism. Remember our building analogy? The economic base dictates the superstructure. The state's economic need for control literally dictates the religious ritual.
Let's break down exactly how this functioned materially. First off, it justified a constant, never-ending demand for tribute in the form of human captives from subjugated groups, like the Tlaxcaltecas. Second, it acted as a form of conspicuous consumption. It was a way for the elite to show off their immense power. Third, and this is wild, some materialist anthropologists like Morgan noted that ritual cannibalism actually served to supplement elite diets in a society that lacked large livestock. And finally, above all else, it was a weapon of absolute political terror, designed to perfectly consolidate the power of the ruling priesthood and the king, the Tlatoani.
It's a crazy stark contrast, right? On one hand, you've got the religious ideology. Blood is absolutely required to feed the sun and maintain the entire cosmic order. But on the other hand, the economic reality under the Marxist lens is that these public executions were designed to enforce absolute submission and ensure the uninterrupted flow of tribute. The state was basically using the ultimate fear of cosmic annihilation to guarantee economic and political compliance on the ground.
Let's look at Section 5, Economics of Social Control, the potlatch state.
Let's tie all these threads together. You'll sometimes hear historians and materialists classify the Aztec Empire as a potlatch state. This is basically a society characterized by the ostentatious, highly public display and even the outright destruction of its own wealth and resources just to legitimize absolute power. So, that massive scale of sacrifices at the Temple Mayor, it wasn't just mindless violence. It was a terrifying, theatrical display of a state willingly consuming its own captured wealth to prove to all its neighbors and subjects that its dominance was absolute.
And this whole brutal machine basically relied on a hyper-strict class divide. At the very top, you have the warrior and priest elite. Their sole economic function is to extract tribute, command the labor force, and enact that ritual terror. On the very bottom, you have the conquered tribes. Their function in this massive machinery is just to provide agricultural surplus, back-breaking physical labor, and tragically, sacrificial victims. It's a completely one-way flow of resources from the oppressed periphery straight to the despotic center.
So how did Marx view their inevitable fall? Well, he wrote a lot about the collision of cultures, and he argued that historically, conquerors with lesser technology are eventually inevitably overtaken by those with superior economic and technological forces. 19th-century materialists didn't just view the violent collision between the Aztec state and European technology as a tragedy. They viewed it as a brutal, inevitable historical shift dictated completely by the laws of economic development and technological superiority.
Which leaves us with one seriously powerful question to ponder. If we apply this exact same lens, if extreme ancient religious rituals were actually just masks for state terror and economic control, what hidden economic systems are driving the ideologies, the media, and the core beliefs of our world today? It's a thought-provoking idea that directly connects the ancient mechanics of an empire to the way power operates in any era. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what forms the real foundation of the world around you.